Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
All right, everybody, welcome to this episode, another episode of Secular Jihadists for Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi, and I'm with Armin Navabi, who's we're both co-hosts of this program.
Hello.
Right, yeah. And Armin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
I don't think Armin likes that question. Anyway,
No.
he's like, it's like always deer in the headlights. But anyway, so. Yeah, welcome. We're going to get right to it. We have a very special guest today. We're speaking to Tanya Joya. Tanya is joining us. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us. She has a very interesting story and an interesting history that I'll actually let her speak to more. Her main thing is that Tanya was when she grew up. I mean, you grew up in the UK, right?
Yep.
Right. So Tanya has a jihadist background, and what happened was that she ended up getting married to a man named John Georgalis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he currently is the highest ranking American in ISIS. And he is also known by several aliases, I think the most well-known of which is Yahya al-Bahrumi. I'm pronouncing that right, I think.
Yeah.
Tanya, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
And so you've been all over, I think, with this. I think your story starts a little bit before 9/11, from what I've read, and then after 9/11, when you met John, and then I think you've been to Egypt, you went to Turkey, you went to Syria. So can you just give us a little background of how it all started? Yeah.
Okay, so I was born in Middlesex area, which is the northwest of London, outside of London, and I grew up in a town called Harrow, which was a mix of middle class and working class people, and had predominantly, English people and Hindus, and Muslims were a minority. So I wasn't raised being particularly religious, but I did have to go to Quran classes every day for 2 hours. And religion was really something my parents used to control us. They thought, it was a way to prevent us from having boyfriends. They thought, but it didn't work. And, just to, control us from having alcohol or being, rebelling. So, they tried that, to control us in that way. Everything was haram except what they said. And when I was 17, I actually read the Quran just to prove my mum wrong. Because she was always saying, everything's in the Quran, whenever she was telling me off, she says, Allah says this and Allah says that, and it's in the Quran. I was like, how can everything be in one book? And I was like, well, I'm going to read the translation, because I knew my mum had never read a translation. And then I read it, and then really believing, from a young age, I never questioned whether the Quran was really a book from God. I just, went off the assumption that my elders knew what they were talking about. So, I didn't doubt, I wouldn't have doubted. I was too scared at the time to doubt that whether it was authentic or not. But, I was like, Mom, do you see what this book says? It says kill polytheists, and it says that the non-believers hate us because we're Muslims. See, Mom, do you see what a hypocrite you are? And I really took it, seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I had some bullying problems when I was a teenager. I was messed up. But, and then what happened is that I moved from, northwest London to East London. And in East London, the Muslims there's a big, population of Bangladeshi community there, and a Bangladeshi and Pakistani community. They're from working class backgrounds, and they're more religiously inclined than from the city that I was from before. And so when I moved to towns, I wanted a new identity. I didn't want to be a Harrow girl. It's kind of like an Essex girl, but from Harrow, if you're following what I mean.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I want to be like all pious. And, I had different things in my life, like The Sound of Music and Disney, that all had a bad effect on me. It was not good. Do you know what I mean? Like, I thought, I was really into Disney when I was a little girl, and I thought that you could get married and live happily ever after. Plus, I came from a background. Yeah. So I was living, I was naive, and I believed in fairy tales still. So I was, not really understanding the difference between reality and fantasy. And plus, I was raised to be quite superstitious. My mum was extremely superstitious growing up. And, going to witch doctors, and even though she'd been in England since the 60s, just because they hadn't really separated themselves from the third world culture, I would say, not very politically correct. They were still believing in spirits and jinns and jinn possession. And when growing up, when I was young, if girls rebelled against the family, like let's say they wanted to date a black guy or they didn't want to be a Muslim, they were beaten. These girls were beaten, and when I asked about it, I was told they were possessed by jinns. Even once when I was in Bangladesh growing up, one of the servant girls, she committed suicide. And I was just a child, and I liked her, and I said, "Where is she?" And all my elders were just saying, "Oh, she was possessed by a jinn and she hung herself." And, so they weren't really preparing me for adulthood or the real world. It's like telling, an adult that Santa Claus is really real, still, when you have a 30-year-old believing that, it's not very smart. But, so I don't even know if my parents now still believe, I'm sure they do believe in jinns, but, it's just that fantasy or, make believe or supernatural beliefs. They haven't separated themselves through secularism or education. They haven't stopped those beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's how I was raised.
What about, you said in school, when you said that, you had some bullying problems, there are also some reports that, you said that there was a lot of, and I remember this, is Majid Nawaz, he's a friend of ours. He also grew up in the UK, and in his memoir, he writes about how he was attacked by skinheads and Nazis with machetes, and there was a lot of racism there in the UK. I mean, in a way that I don't think it's as much in North America. Like over here, we don't see it as much, but in the UK, some of the stories that we hear are much more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can tell you some stories about that. Like, so in Harrow, when I was living in Harrow, we needed a big house because I came from an oversized family, and next door to us was a halfway house, and which means that ex-convicts living in a house and they would have a parole officer come visit them every now and then. But they were skinheads. Some of them were like skinhead dykes. They were the scariest ones for me. But they had these German shepherds that used to attack us when we used to leave our house, our doorstep. I just used to, I became afraid to leave my house, which is not healthy for a child. And then I remember them trying to attack my little brother, who was just a baby at the time. And I hated them. I hated living there. I would have kids call me Paki and Darky and go home back to Afghanistan. That was later with the hijab, but before it was like, go back home, you stinky Indians. But it wasn't just the racism from the English people that put me off from British society. It was the ethno-racism within the Indian subcontinent community that used to bother me a lot too. I just felt like in England, each culture, the Indians and Pakistanis didn't like each other. They hated each other. And then the Pakistanis looked down on the Bangladeshis, and no one liked each other. Every group was quite hostile to each other. And so once when I did move to East London and I became, I started learning about Muslims, Islam, and how it brought all these nationalities together, and we could look past national identity and we would just we had a connection by Islam. And for me at the time, I believe that was social justice. And I sort of saw everything as being very black and white. I thought, yes, Islam's the solution for the third world. We're going to take over Western imperialism. I was an idealist, but I was 17 years old. So, and then, it was after September 11th, and I was living in East London at the time. There was some racism from the English people. They were embarking. That's where I was living in the town in East London. They were, the English people, there was a lot of white, what are they called? EDL and, the English Defence League were big. They were popular at the time. And I would see them
popular after 9/11?
Yeah.
Around that time? Or?
So no, after 9/11, they were like, yeah, it was, I guess they rose, like, they became more and more popular as more immigrants were coming into the area of East London. Well, I went to school there, and I would see these boys at my school always attacking the girls who wore hijab. And I knew that they weren't bothering me because I wasn't wearing a hijab, and I didn't like it. I was like, you're just being nasty to these girls. And for me, I just saw them as being sweet little girls wearing hijab that prayed all the time, and they didn't do anything wrong. So I would defend the girls. And then, but at the same time, they were my friends, and I thought that their culture was good for me because it was controlling me. I wasn't being a wild teenager or like rebelling in the ways that my parents had.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, I think Armin had something to ask, but before that, I just wanted to, because, you mentioned the English Defence League. They were actually founded a lot later, but I think that the sentiment behind it, that of the people who were actually, it went along to form it, and the kind of sentiment and the antipathy after 9/11 had started much, much earlier, I think. So
right, exactly. I couldn't remember. I don't think they were given a name at that time. I know that the EDL, you're right, they were around 2007 time period.
Yeah,
but they were basically just English racist kids from Essex.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah.
So you mentioned that you read the Quran unlike your mother, but you also experienced racism or bigotry from other people. And, at that time you weren't wearing a hijab, but what moved you more and more towards a more conservative view of Islam, more mainstream, more fundamentalist? I don't know. You mentioned in another interview I saw you that you became like accepted the jihadi ideology, right? Do you think it was mostly the fact that people were being against Muslims, and then you thought that this whole Muslim community was the solution and was bringing you together? Or was it reading the Quran and your understanding of what needs to be done, how a Muslim is supposed to, like, take us through that journey? From then, how did you start going into become accepting of a more extreme view of how things need to be?
Right. So I read the Quran, and I did take it literally. When I did try to look up the tafsir, the explanations, I was kind of like, well, it's very self-explanatory. I don't really need a third party to clarify the words of God. He pretty much speaks well for himself. And there was jihad mentioned, and I knew what jihad meant. I knew what killing means. I knew what fighting means. I didn't need somebody to take me between the lines and say it only means jihad of the nafs, the struggle of yourself. I didn't need somebody to explain that because I knew what God meant, and the history pretty much explained it too. Even the story of the Prophet and how he expanded, it's just well-known knowledge. He expanded through war. It was the sword that made a lot of people convert, especially of Quraysh. Why else would they convert? They didn't believe. They just knew that if they didn't convert, they would be dead. So they, for example, some of the Sahaba, Hind, for example, she converted when he came and conquered Mecca. And if the Quraysh hadn't surrendered, they would have, Muhammad and his army would have fought for it. They didn't take it peacefully. So I knew what jihad meant, and so when Sufis tried to explain it off, I didn't buy it. When Bin Laden spoke about jihad, it made sense to me. It made sense to me in terms of he was using the Quran and Hadith and was saying how it was, a lot of it. Except when he brought in Ibn Taymiyyah, then I disagree. That's a different topic. So, so I had friends who were in HT and relatives who were in HT, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and they really introduced me to the political side of Islam too, and introducing the idea of a caliphate. And I was, I was susceptible to it, and I was already studying politics at school, and I understood it as, well, Muhammad, he was a caliph, and if he wanted caliphates to rule after him, and he said that there needs to be a head of a state because the ummah is a nation, then it just made sense that a community has a leader. So I was always pro-caliphate because I also wanted some sort of system. I knew communism had failed. I wasn't convinced by capitalism because I felt, at the time, I was like, I wanted something spiritual. And I think also I had the kind of personality that would have been susceptible to any radical idea that was opposing governments at the time, because I was very distrustful of my elders and authority for many, many reasons. And
so do you think it was a combination? Was it just the distrust and the anti-establishment sentiment, or did some of the other the things that you went through, like your family pressures, or the racist neighbors, all of these, was there one, or just being convinced by the ideology in the Quran? So were all of these together, or was it one thing way more than another in driving you towards?
Well, it was all of them, and probably many more reasons that drove me. I wasn't like, again, I like to make it clear to people that even though I was raised in the West, and Muslims who aren't pro-jihad are categorized as being secular Muslims, but they're not necessarily. I wasn't raised with secular values, meaning I wasn't believed in like everyone's equal and that everyone has, we have certain freedoms and freedom of religion. I wasn't raised with any of these concepts. I didn't believe I had a choice because Islam came first, even if it was just lip service. It might be a lip service for a lot of non-practicing Muslims, but I really took it seriously and to heart. And I thought it was, I didn't want to, when you're a teenager and you're an adolescent, I feel like there was I was sincere, but it was, and I just felt like everyone around me wasn't. I was being very judgmental. Mm-hmm. So back to school, I had and relatives, I had HT influence. I had Al-Muhajirun. I had friends from Al-Muhajirun, and they were a little bit more violent on the violent side because they supported Al-Qaeda, whereas Hizb ut-Tahrir didn't. They were just about protests. And so when, leading up to the war in Iraq, there were protests, and I would take part in the protests. And after, there was a 1 million man march, and the British government didn't care. They didn't care what the people were saying, what the people wanted. And I thought, well, just goes and supports the Muslims, that democracy doesn't really work. It's all about what the elites want, and whatever they say goes. So we got to cut the head off the snake. And I really thought that jihad was the solution. If we just, I was still thinking on French Revolution terms. I was like, we get rid of these guys and we can flush out the system and put good people in charge who actually care. And I thought when I was young that only God-fearing people were people that would have.
And then you met your ex-husband. How did that happen? Like, so you go step by step from here. How did you, if also there's a step in between that we missed, also bring that up as well.
Okay. So I was at this march for the war against Iraq, and there were some guys, practicing Muslim guys, who were handing out little strips of paper. They weren't even pamphlets, but they were handing out pieces of paper saying www.muslimmatrimony.com. So, and they could see I'm just small, pretty hijabi girl who looks like she needs to get married. They came right up to me with all my sisters around me who weren't wearing hijabs, and they gave it right to me, even though my sisters are older and were supposed to get married before me. So they gave to me. I was like, sure, I want to run away from home. Let me just, find somebody who will be my mahram, my companion, and I'll be free from my family. So, it was, for me, I was just looking for a way out. I wanted to travel. I wanted, yeah.
No, sorry. One of the things that, I mean, before we even get to that is that, so you're talking about the Iraq War protests, but before that, 9/11 happened. So you have an interesting history with 9/11 where, at least from what I've read, and please correct me if any of these reports are wrong, because I know they often are, is that you became more radicalized after 9/11 happened, from what I read. Now, we have we do have other friends that we know who've had sort of similar backgrounds, like Yasmin Mohammed was a previous co-host on the podcast, and Ayan Hirsi Ali is another sort of ex-Muslim atheist, and she said that 9/11 kind of changed it. Like she was more, I guess, radicalized before, and then when 9/11 happened, that woke her up and turned her into a more secular direction. So what was it about 9/11? I know that this ultimately also led you to meeting your ex-husband, but what was it after 9/11 that made you become more radicalized?
Okay, so what happened was September 11th happened, and I went to talk to my school friends about it, and they were all supporting it. And at first I was like, I was in my politics class, and I had my Pakistani buddy next to me who, I loved her to bits. And he said, wasn't it terrible what happened yesterday? And she was like, was it terrible? And I was like, she didn't just say that. So I was like in denial. And I was like, so wasn't it bad? I asked her again, and she was like, okay, come after school to my house and I'll get my parents to explain it to you. I was like, sure, okay. So I started going to her house after. They were Brailevis too, which is strange. But so they were still political. They were supporting Al-Mahajir and HD, all the political groups that were calling for Sharia and Islamic State. And they explained it to me about American imperialism. They explained the effects of the Cold War and how really they made it sound like, the Muslim nation was destroyed by the non-Muslims, going all the way back to Napoleon or during the Caliphate. The history goes so far back. And I felt like, I was like, oh, this is my history. And I wanted a history, and I wanted to, as far as I was concerned, being a Bengali British Muslim, I was like, there's nothing there. Bangladesh is 40 years old. It's nothing to be particularly proud of. I was quite judgmental and had very negative thoughts about the culture anyway. But so while I was going to school, I was meeting Algerians and then these Pakistani girls whose parents were really taking me in and talking to me about politics and history, which I didn't do with my own parents. So they had a big influence over me. And they were giving me an identity that I didn't have. So I was adopting a new personality and conforming. So that's what happened to me after September 11th. And then I put on the hijab and the jilbab and started covering my face. The school principal didn't like it.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the jilbab to listeners who may not be familiar with it?
Why did the school principal didn't like wearing the hijab?
Yeah, well, my school principal liked checking out the pretty girls at school. That's what I remember. I'm not kidding. And I knew it, and that made me feel eerie. And I didn't like it when there was this 60-year-old old white man checking me out and he was slimy. So I was like, more of a reason for me, I felt like, to cover up. And even there was pressure from the Indian community. Not Indian, but Indian subcontinent community. The girls would put pressure on me to be more traditional. They said I was too Western. I came with jeans. I wore makeup. They would, they would essentially slut shame me. And even though I wasn't, like that, but I was just from a different part of England, but they wanted me to be more like them. They wanted me to cover. And the more I covered, the more they wanted me to cover. They just kept asking me to cover and cover and cover until I was covering my eyes and my hands, and just to please these guys. And now I look back and I think, gosh, they had problems, but and I was too insecure to see it. So I met my ex-husband online.
Was he a jihadist at this point?
Yeah. And we both had, so he was in Syria. He converted when he was 17 years old. And then he sold his truck. He moved to Syria to learn Arabic.
He was a Christian before that, right?
Yeah. He was an Orthodox Christian, very religious Christian too. So he moved from one extreme, and he moved from one extreme to another extreme. Because when he was a Christian, he was hacking into Muslim websites and taking them down, and he, they classified, because he was from a Greek Orthodox background, they classified all Muslims as Turks. So it's just terrible, right? We're all Ottomans to them.
That's funny. They're stuck in the past. It's funny.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, Orthodox, Armin. Like, what does that mean? Anyway. So, go ahead.
So, and, when he found me, he wanted, I hate saying this, but he really just wanted a mother. And I was like, because he was 19 and I was 19 and
you mean mother for his children?
No, for him. He wanted a mom.
Oh,
he missed his mom.
Armin is so innocent. Armin is our innocent host. So sweet.
He wanted someone to pour his cereal for him and cook him dinners again. He missed it because he'd been living in Syria without anyone taking care of him. And all the bachelors, I think, over there at the time were missing maternal love. And he saw, I was online and he knew I wanted to travel. I mean, there aren't too many Muslim girls, I don't think, that are willing to marry an American stranger and travel around the world with him. But I was at liberty to do so. My parents knew they couldn't control me regardless. So I was going to do what I wanted to do. So I was up for it. I was like, you're in Syria? That's cool. I want to learn Arabic and you're smart and I want a big family. And he was making all these lovely promises to me, like we'd be happy with 7 kids and live happily ever after in the Middle East. And, and I wouldn't have to hear any racism. And then plus he was an American. And I was like, well, that's cool. You got good citizenship. My parents are going to approve of this. And they did.
And this was the timeline.
Did they approve? Did they approve?
Yeah, they liked him. They liked him a lot. He was the son of a doctor. He was middle class. I came from a working class background, and he
wasn't a jihadist at this time, right?
No,
he was religious, but wasn't a jihadist yet.
He was a jihadist in the terms that he would support jihad, but not. We were still. Yeah. He was on the fence about Al Qaeda at the time. I think I was probably a little bit more pro Al Qaeda than he was, but again, I was hanging out with Salafis, Algerian Salafis, and who, were refugees from Algeria, and they came with their Salafi teachings. And so I was a bit of everything, and he was
your family was pro Al Qaeda as well?
No, not at all. They didn't know anything about any group other than HT.
So they just were very religious, but didn't know any of these organizations, though.
They weren't religious. I mean, they would pray when they wanted to. They were Ramadan Muslims, I'd say.
Ramadan Muslim, okay, yeah.
They were like my family, right? Armin, you know what we talk about? Like, we think, I would think compared to my frame of reference that my parents were more religious, obviously, compared to me. But when you look at somebody, like, when we talk to Yaz or, we're talking to Tanya right now, from their point of view, like, we're hippies. You know what I mean?
So for the sake of the audience, by Ramadan Muslims, they're basically Muslims that take Islam seriously 1 month every year and during Ramadan, and then they stop practicing again after Ramadan. So did you think your parents are going to go to hell?
Yes, and I used to tell them that all the time. And I was for years. I was just like, you guys are kafirs, and I'm like, it was so rude. Now my parents are calling me the kafir. So you too.
I still tell people that all the time, just for fun. Anyway. So yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, I was really against the idea of voting, and they were they were voting Muslims, but they were not secular Muslims, and I also have my issues with that because I feel like, so my background, I came from a Bengali cultural family that did force girls to get married, that did beat girls if they rebelled and would say they were possessed by jinns. And, these girls would be starved and locked up. And if you there was just so much degradation for girls. We were literally raised like servants, and it's, yeah, not in a very loving environment. That's why I wanted to go away, and I wanted to have my own family. And I also feel like my parents didn't question whether John would be a wife beater or if he was sane or any of these things. That they let me get married to somebody they didn't know and I didn't know. And I had to find out what he was like after I got married to him because I couldn't get a divorce after that. So there's issues there.
So just to be clear, you couldn't get a divorce because women in Islam can't get a divorce. It's a man that chooses if they get it, right?
You need his permission. You need the man's permission to get a divorce. And John never gave me permission. I went ahead and did the divorce through American civil courts, but he wouldn't accept it. He was like, it's meaningless to me.
So when
I was like, I'm not Muslim. He was like, you just ignore that.
So when you, just to get the timeline right. So when you met John and he was in Syria, this is around, what year is this? This is around 2004, 2005, around that time? Or? 2003. Okay.
We got married, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I met him at the end of 2002. We were just talking through emails. And then he came from Syria to visit me in London.
Yeah.
Then we got married, and then we went from there.
But you didn't want to go to Syria originally, right? You wanted to go to Turkey?
I wanted to go to Jordan. Okay, so that time I wanted to go to Jordan because we had friends who were there, and I knew Jordan was a little bit more modern than Syria, but he wanted to go to Syria because that's where Jesus is supposed to return, the Messiah, to one of the mosques. And
the Dabiq prophecy, right? Like where...
Yeah. Just to be clear to the audience, he was a Muslim, but Sunni Muslims believe that at the end times, Jesus also coming back. Actually, Shias believe that too.
Yeah, Jesus is a sacred figure in Islam. And I think that the prophecy, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is the Dabiq, or I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but that prophecy that eventually we're going to fight the Romans there, and the Muslims and the non-Muslims are going to have their final showdown in that city in Syria, right?
Yeah, I did hear that hadith, and that after when Dabiq was released, but at the time when John and I were in Syria, we were trying to move to Ghouta, which you might be familiar with. It's been attacked quite for the last 5 years, but Eastern Ghouta. We thought that's the hadith that we were going off. It said that that Jesus was going to have an army base in Ghouta, and then that's where the believers will be. They will all gather to that town before the showdown where they kill every Jew. Which is terrible.
Yeah. Is it specifically really going after I mean, and there's that's
where all the gharqad trees are.
There's a hadith for this too. Like every tree and every stone is going to mention, like if the Jews are going to go hide behind the trees and the stones, right? And rocks, and the rocks is going to give them away to the Muslims, right? This rock is going to speak and say, "Hey, Muslims, there's a Jew hiding behind me. Come get it, right? Like, come get him, right?" Like, is that what you guys believed in as well?
We believed it, yeah.
Yeah.
We believed it like ghosts and
so
gullible. We were so gullible. I'm sorry.
That's
painful.
Oh, that's I mean, this is I think I just want to, I guess, bring up something. We'll continue with the story, but you were recently on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, and I saw that interview where I think he was just looking for certain answers. Like he was saying, what do you think about the Quran? That didn't fit his narrative. And then later he asked you about your feelings about your ex-husband. And obviously those are going to be complicated because, you were in a relationship.
Let her tell us what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, with Piers Morgan? Yeah, go
ahead. Okay, so he was, really antagonizing me. And so when he brought up the Quran, I felt like, okay, I'm on this show for 6 minutes and all you're doing is talking, and let me just tell you very quickly in 10 seconds what I think. And so I summed it up I blurted out. I wish I had worded it better, but I said, yeah, the Quran's a terrible book. But if I had been given more time and if I'd been prepared, I would have, given a thorough argument as to why I think it's wrong. And it's full of mythological stories from the Old Testament. And it's, full of lots of lies and threats about hell. And, the God is quite bipolar in these books and narcissistic. And, but I couldn't give those arguments even, properly in a very short interview. And I don't think he was willing to listen anyway. So what was the second part of the question?
The second part, when you mentioned your husband also.
Oh, yes, my husband. Yeah, I'm not going to disrespect the father of my children on any show. I will say he was abusive. He thought that Islam gave him the right to be abusive. And to a degree, as a Muslim woman, I didn't have enough self-respect to believe I deserved better treatment in some ways. I really did believe he was in authority over me. And when he told me that I'm being a bad wife and I'm not being supportive, I felt guilty, because that was my job. I was supposed to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. And then it stops there. And then probably the perfect grandmother. But, I was supposed to be the carer and I was supposed to be supportive. And so I felt like I was not being a good wife to him when I wasn't supporting him. And even now, I don't want to disrespect him because there were bad times and there were good times. And, it's very hard for me to say anything.
So I want to one of the things that I wanted to say was that I think that this was a squandered opportunity, I guess, because, it's TV shows. He could have, by listening to you, I think that he could have gotten a lot of insight. I mean, he doesn't necessarily have to agree with you, and we don't, obviously all of us can have a discussion, but, I think that people who've had experiences like yours, there's a lot to learn from it because to me, it feels like once you just dismiss the other side as all good, all bad, and your side is all good, then you have pretty much shut off every avenue to be able to understand where they're coming from. And if you don't understand that, you don't have to agree with them, you don't even have to like them, but if you don't understand where people are coming from, then you can't fight that. For instance, like with serial killers, there are criminal profilers. There's a whole show on Netflix called Mindhunter, where they talk about how they started criminally profiling and understanding the psychology and really sitting down and talking to people to understand where they come from. And if people don't do that, I don't think they'll understand it. And one last thing I was going to say about this is that with religious people, I don't think it's the same as it is with, say, just psychopaths who know that they're doing something wrong. With religious people, a lot of them are, whatever they're doing is they think they're doing it for the right reasons. They think they're doing it for the good reasons. So what they think what they're doing is conscientious. And if we
they think what they're doing is virtuous.
Right. And if we dismiss that part of it, then I don't think we'll ever be able to understand how to fight it or how to counter it or how to sort of save other people from falling into that trap. So
absolutely, I agree. Because I try to tell people, I say to people, maybe I can reach out to young people and give them the voice of reason that they don't hear in their communities. Mm-hmm. And then people say to me, well, when you were 17, would you have listened to a voice of reason? And I like to think I would have, but if I hadn't, maybe a 10-year-old will hear what I'm saying. And by the time they're 17, they will be strong enough to say, no, that's the wrong way to think, because I know so-and-so and I've heard her story over the years and I know what radicalism and extremism what it led her to. So I'm hoping people can learn from my experience and my story. And also I feel like, there aren't too many women in the Muslim community that I know of, that I'm aware of, that are willing to explain, what it feels like emotionally, on the emotional level of being in that position as a wife of hardcore jihadist Muslim and coming to the reality.
Just to understand what happened, when you went on the show with Piers Morgan, when he asked you about the Quran, you said you think the Quran is a terrible book. and he's talking about, he mentioned other interpretations and stuff like that. So he was basically trying to defend this book, this horrible book, which I think it was actually the perfect way of describing it. So I think you did a great job. But then when you went to your ex-husband, and I completely understand, no matter how horrible a person we see somebody being is, you had a history with this person, so there's some emotional attachment still there. I mean, no matter how, there's no such thing as pure evil. There's everybody, even the worst of all people, there have something, you could find something good about them. And even the best of people, you could find something evil bad about them, right? So
he's got some mental illness. I mean, who wouldn't in that situation? I think everybody is suffering from, in Syria anyway, and those who've left war zones. We're all suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and we have to understand it, because if you don't have an understanding, first you have to, other people have to understand the situation to help these people, to make them understand that they are sick and they need help. And, once they come to terms, once they're open and can open their mind to a different way of life,
But what I was getting at is that when you mentioned that he said they both of him and the lady said there's no good thing about ISIS. But the thing is that there's hope for everybody. We have ex-jihadis, we have ex-Nazis. There's if you consider people as just evil and just dismiss them as pure evil, then you're not going to try to change that about them. But I think there's always...
And we have them on the show. Armin actually talks to them all the time. Like ex-Nazis and ex-fundamentalists, and we do that all the time.
And one of my best friends is an ex-neo-Nazi woman that I would have been so afraid of at one point in my life, as a child. But yeah, she's...
But what's interesting is the way that they're looking at it is completely the opposite, because he's defending the book, this horrible book. He gets offended when you're calling it a horrible book. But the person, the people, he sees them as irredeemable, completely lost, completely. The people that we think that even the jihadist ones still have a chance. So people call us hateful when we attack Islam, but the same people that call us hateful when we say even ISIS member have a chance, they think like, oh, we're too tolerant. But wait, you just called us too hateful. But they have it the opposite. They are defending the ideology, but they wouldn't defend the people that I think these are still human beings that deserve a chance.
Yeah, we're humanists, right? So so the difference here is that for me and for you, I believe, is that we disagree with the ideology and its principles, but we understand that the human has been manipulated by these ideas and indoctrinated, whether it's through, just by their social circles.
Right.
So we understand the difference. It's just about your environment. I was taken out that environment. I was unhappy while I was in that environment. And so once I was taken out, I was free. And I wonder how many people that would work with. You take these people out their social circles, out that social influence, and then and educate them and teach them not to be afraid to think, because Islam does put, it doesn't just put a cover on our heads, a hijab. It limits how much we can think. It has boundaries.
Yeah. And I wanted, sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, please go ahead. Yeah. Let me answer your question.
Okay. So, yeah, no, I was going to, I do want to get back to the story that you were saying, because, we're getting to the interesting parts there. But I wanted to ask you one more question. So there is over here up in Canada where Armin and I are, Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, he said that people returning ISIS fighters from Syria and from ISIS territories, he wants to reintegrate them. And that's caused a lot of outrage. And people saying, these are people who've been taking sex slaves. These are people who've been throwing gays off rooftops and chopping off heads. And we're going to bring them back. They need to be punished. So, that Trudeau is being too tolerant about it. And I also heard you say on the Piers Morgan show that, so, you have complicated feelings for him. If he does come back, then he should be, punished for what he did, right? So what?
Let me cut in. So what I really like if you like, sorry, I really like it. So if you look at, I think Norway is a good example of their rehabilitation program for extremists. There was that guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He went to an island and shot up a big community of people who were camping. Anyone?
Oh, Anders Breivik, right? Anders.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's in prison for life, but he is in humane conditions. And they're not caging him. He has his own room. He's got a television set. He has what he needs. And I believe that anyone incarcerated needs to be treated humanely and educated and, taught the secular values and humanist values to make them love humanity again. And even though they were, being raised, they must have been in hardship or something caused them to live a life of crime, lead them to prison. It's just like we have to heal these people, not just keep punishing them. We're not like God. We don't have to, talk about punishment.
But Tanya, the counter argument would be that, what he did, why should he get the chance, like Anders Breivik, why should he get the chance that all of his victims were not able to get? Like they just they just died. He killed them. He robbed that from them. So why should he get it? Now, I actually, largely, agree with you. I think that, the only way to, make people compassionate is to show them compassion by example. So I don't think that incarcerated people should be treated really, really badly. I think they should be treated humanely. But is there a balance there? I mean, how do you provide justice to, say, the families of all of the victims who never got that chance to have the TV in their room and to, take time and be rehabilitated?
I'm just going to speak for myself, for example, but as an example, I feel like when I came to the realization that I was living a lie and I had just been on the wrong side of the fence when it came to history, I felt like I indebted to society. I felt like, okay, now I have to make up for what I've done. Even though I was just a housewife and a homeschool teacher most of my marriage, I felt like, okay, I was, and I feel bad for how I was raised my children. I feel a lot of guilt and I want to I feel like a lot of people, when they come to the same realization that I came to, will feel the same way. Like, we want to make up for the wrong that we've done. We want to make up, whether it's by believing in the ideology and spreading the ideology or protesting for the wrong reasons or like defying authority and secular values. Whatever wrong I've done, I want to just make up for it and make sure no one else, I want to prevent this from going on another 20 years, this problem or more. And okay. I just feel like a lot of these Muslims, we get into Islam because, it gives us that social system of justice, not just justice, but being a good person, that we weren't getting from the materialist society that we were growing up in. Secular society wasn't encouraging us to do charitable works and give charity and have these good morals of looking out for your neighbor and these things. Love your brother, give to your brother what you want for yourself. All this selflessness, or even though you get rewarded by God, so I wouldn't say it's completely altruistic. But it did bring out some good qualities in us in that helping a community and thinking of wanting a community. So I feel like for myself, growing up in Britain, I don't know, if I had been brought up as really believing in humanist values or secularist values, or if there had been some sort of organization out there for young people who want to do good and want to have some sense of belonging and community, there needs to be social programs like that for people.
So regarding
but not religious.
Regarding these programs, there's different competing methods that some people suggest the best way to reach out to these people is to teach them that Islam doesn't teach these evil things, that the Quran teaches something else, that the Quran is peaceful, that Islam doesn't tell you to, that, Jews are bad or this and that, and basically teach a different version of Islam. But me and Ali and some other people think that's bullshit, that doesn't work. And best way to reach out to people to change it up, to be honest with them and basically maybe encourage them doubting their own ideology. Even if you can't convince them, maybe just, show them competing ideologies, show them different values, show them different ways of looking at the world. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, I believe that, we should actually just explain Islam for what it is and not sugarcoat it. And since we're living in a secular society, if, our governments want us to prioritize our values, Western values over Islamic values, and, we need to be taught why. We need all these systems compared. And, I didn't have that sort of education when I was growing up. So I didn't really know about the values that secular.
What was it about you then? What was it about? A lot of people look at your story and there's such they see like you were very religious, and then all of a sudden you completely gave it all up. What do you think there's something unique about you, or was it the conditions your environment? Is it that you're always rebellious and always looking, or is it that you're curious? What do you think happened there? Or
can I add something to that question, Armin?
Yes.
Just to sort of like, I'm just going to bring our reference, Yasmin Mohammed, who was, she was actually married to a member of Al Qaeda who's now in jail in Egypt. So she had a sort of similar history that you did, but she said that when she was raised wearing the niqab and the hijab, and even after she gave it up, she found it very difficult to immediately take it off, right? It took a little while for her to get used to it. In your case, the story.
I ripped mine off and I was proud. I was so happy. I was like, haha, the world doesn't know what it's in for.
So
that's what I actually saw. I was in a Turkish bathroom, a Turkish airport, sorry. And I went to the bathroom. I told my kids to wait. I went in with a hijab. I came out with a hijab, and my kids are like, Mommy, where's your hijab? I said, we're in Turkey. I don't have to wear hijab. And they said, Mommy, there are women here with a hijab on. And I was like, stop asking me questions. We're going to England. Hush. I was like, even when they're kids, there were arguments. But, it was 2009 when I actually, 2008, 2009, I stopped reading the Quran because I hated it. But I was in a marriage, that I knew I couldn't get out of. There was nowhere for me to go. I had children, and my priority was to keep the family together. That was my number one priority. So where we
now? Let's get back to. Sorry, so you were in last night. You were in you'd gone to Jordan first. Okay, this is when you came back.
This is in 2008-9. John had just come out of prison, and he was on probation. And while he was on probation, that was the best time of my life because he had to stay put. He wasn't allowed to leave the town that we were living in without permission from his probation officer. That meant that we couldn't go running off to the Middle East. And that, he had a stable job, and I was happy. Mm-hmm. And during this time, I was learning about Ron Paul and libertarian. I was watching, don't laugh, but I was watching.
Armin is he describes himself as a libertarian as well. So you've got company.
All right, good, great. So fellow libertarian. I was listening to Judge Andrew Napolitano a lot, and it was really him and Ron Paul that were educating me about freedom and what it really means and what it means to be enslaved. And I was like, I do not want to keep doing this. Islam exhausts me. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I felt like God asks too much. I just got so frustrated that I couldn't even make any single decision without interference, whether it was by my husband or by God or by Muhammad and by all these other people, all these men. And
they're all men.
They're all men, yeah. And I used to help my ex-husband a lot with understanding women and being sympathetic to what's our rights and our needs. And he would say to me, and I used to complain how there are just not enough women scholars to voice concerns of women. But also at the same time, when I was around in the Muslim community, a lot of the women, the Salafi women, were male chauvinistic. They were supportive of male chauvinism and misogyny. And so that was really hard for me to combat. Like I could explain to my husband about it because I think as he was American, he understood, was more compassionate to what I was saying. And he wanted, didn't want women to be unhappy. But when it came to people from Muslim backgrounds who were practicing Muslims and jihadists, I couldn't get through to them as well, just because that's all they knew. They didn't want to question the system, how it was.
What, would you consider yourself a Muslim? Because you say you hated reading the Quran. Did you feel guilty that you hated reading the Quran, or were you at this point like not practicing anymore? What
I
did you feel?
was practicing, but it was forced on me. Like, I didn't want to wear the hijab because I got tired of Americans looking at me like I'm going to blow them up. I didn't.
But did you feel guilty that you hated reading the Quran? Do you feel you even like because God could see?
Well, the Quran made me feel guilty about everything, and that was for me exhausting because I was like, okay, I really need to focus on my children, and I was homeschooling at the time because we didn't want them to go public school, and so I was like, I just used to like get mad. I was like, I cannot be a mother, a good, at the time my role was only being a mother. That was like all I focused on. And I was like, God wants all these things, wants me to do all these things for the community and the ummah and save the world, but I'm not prepared to do that. Right now, if anything, I felt guilty because I loved my children more than my religion.
But
like,
ummah means Islamic community, by the way, to people. Yeah.
So your husband, so your ex-husband comes out of prison or jail in the U.S. So how do you? 2009. So how does that? How does your story proceed from there, where you end up in Syria? And you were in Syria until 2013, right?
Right. So the day he came off probation, which was October 1st, 2011, and I was pregnant with my third. With no insurance.
And why was he in prison? Or
he was accused of hacking into AIPAC's website or attempting AIPAC. So American-Israeli relations. It's a lobbyist.
Yeah. They fund this podcast, by the way. Them and the Illuminati.
I love you guys. No, that's too bad. I'm going to suck up there. I know my place now. I'm a humanist. I know my place.
That's a joke. This podcast is not a Jewish conspiracy. Anyway.
Well, that's really funny because, I think Islam, religion, is very much no different from a conspiracy theory. It's a very simplistic answer to a very complicated world.
I love that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. But
so after he came off probation, and I didn't want to go to Egypt because I was like, it's dirty, and I'm tired of traveling. I'm comfortable here. It wasn't. We're just living a normal life, and I was happy with it. As stressful as it was, having 2 kids and being pregnant with a third, I just didn't want to move again because I loved my home. And when you're pregnant, you don't know when you're pregnant, but when women are pregnant, they just want to have a nest and a comfort zone. And you guys have been pregnant a few times.
Well, I did.
Yeah, I know. The other half.
I tell my wife all the time when she was pregnant. I was like, hey, I know what it's like. Sometimes I ate way too many slices of pizza, and it's have a C-section.
At night.
I know.
But it's really hard. It's so traumatic, and even that alone, the contraception, that it's forbidden in Islam, it just wore me out. And it's just too much to ask for a human being to just be a baby making machine. And I just felt like that's all I was. And I felt enslaved. I used to complain to my husband. I said, Muslim men treat women, their wives, like slaves.
But you went through something so many other women go through. But what was the difference between you that you managed to decide that this is bullshit? I'm not going to take this anymore. What was the difference between you and all those other women?
Well, when John took me to Syria, that was the last hair on a camel's back for me. Because he had deceived me. He had done. So first he took me to Syria when he was supposed to take me to Jordan. Then he was supposed to take me to Libya. I was okay with Gaddafi. I thought he was the best dictator in the Middle East. I was like real pro Gaddafi. And then,
even though he's not that, good. He wasn't that religious.
Yeah, he funded that. He funded that movie Muhammad. The Muhammad, The Message, and he funded a really good movie called The Lion of the Desert, which was about.
Yeah, but compared to the other dictators, he seemed like more I mean, he like a lot of really jihadist Muslims seem to think that all of that was for show, right?
Well, there was a big socialist element there too, right? Because I grew up, we were for the first like 6 years, we were in Libya for about 6 years, my family and I, in Tripoli. I even met Gaddafi once when I was very, very, very tiny. Little, and he so it's I mean, I'm not a fan of Gaddafi at all, but he did have, it was sort of he did like the whole socialistic thing. They did have food on rations where you picked up your rations for food. It was interesting. I was too little to sort of process it at the time, but
it became like the most prosperous country in Africa. And it had it only had a population of 6 million people, but they were educated. And at the time, like if I had to pick where I wanted to live, and my ex-husband wasn't going to let me make hijra, migrate to Dubai, which would have been my first choice. But so it was like, I was like, okay, Libya, kind of, let's do Libya.
Wait, really? Between going to Kaaba and doing Libya, you picked Libya?
So, no, I didn't want to go Kaaba. I was really, I have these strange phobias, but one of them was going to Mecca and being around people and germs. And killing.
So wait, at this point,
I know, it's just embarrassing.
But at this point,
no, it's actually really human.
But at this point, you weren't consider you were done with, you're just pretending at this point to be a Muslim, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, every single month I would say something blasphemous and then spend the next 4 weeks repenting for it. It was like the cycle wouldn't stop. And John would always say to me, you can be killed for saying what you're saying. And I would be like, I know, but it's just how I feel. And if I say what I feel, you're telling me it's because I'm following Satan. And that's the only comeback they have.
Did he ever waver though? Did he ever, or was he solid in his faith?
So solid. I hated it. It drove me mad. Because he put it before me and the kids always. And a lot of Muslim men do that. They put what they call, their brothers and all their community work before their families and neglect their wives and time because they're working and then after they work, they go hang out with their brothers instead of with their families. And Tablighi Jama'ah do the same thing. They go around, to door trying to convert people and they don't even know what their children are up to. And,
they say jihad is my first wife and you're my second wife, right? Something like that. I heard. But it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you went to Islam because you were rebellious and you left Islam because you were very rebellious. Is that a
Well, I like to think I became a bit more sensible and matured. I don't know, because I rebelled. But I didn't rebel.
Rebel, I see it as a good thing. Like rebel against being controlled, rebel against being boxed in, rebels against, you wanted to be free. You don't want other people to dictate.
Exactly. And I didn't want, like, my husband who was making constantly poor decisions. I was losing trust in him and I was questioning him. See, when I first got married to him, I was, he used to buy me books on how to be a good wife, which I thought was so demeaning. And I was like, get yourself a book saying how to be a good husband. But it was terrible, like the rules in there. And it was all Salafi, propaganda. And it's just drove me mad. But I tried really hard. I really, I tried not to be myself because I felt like, if humans act like themselves, we're just damned for hell.
You seem to be too strong to be able for any ideology to control you. That's what it seems like.
So I'm trying
to make up my own religion.
That's good. Yeah, that's what we're doing. That's the secular jihad. Anyway, so we're going to, so now you're choosing between, Libya, Jordan, Syria, and you said that John then deceived you.
Well,
and he took you to Syria.
Very last minute. Yeah, last minute. Well, okay, so we ended up going to Egypt because he was so happy that there was no government. For a year, Mubarak had fallen and there was no government. And that was John's dream because he was like, no one's going to watch me there. No one can keep an eye on us. So, we really believed after the Arab Spring that this was a great opportunity to establish caliphate. And so we went to Egypt, and then Morsi came into power. That was a great year for all of us. And then,
so were you still pro-caliphate at this time?
Yes.
Like you were?
Yeah, and I used to feel like, even though I didn't believe, I felt like it was a good social system. I think it kept people in checks and balances, kept people under control. Yeah, that's how how I felt. And as I was a mother, and I was like, I was, but I don't have my children as often as I used to. I say I'm a part-time mom now. But, so being a mother, all I wanted was a safe, good environment for my kids. I didn't want them exposed to, racism or pornography when they're older, or, even gays. I was like, no, I can't handle I had all these fears that the world would take over corrupt my children.
What about, are you, for now, if your son comes and says he's gay or starts watching pornography, now are you, like, you see that as corruption?
No, it's completely normal. I just would say, please don't disrespect women by watching pornography, because that's not how women are in real life, and you shouldn't be treating women that way. And if one of my sons came and said they're gay, I would just say, okay, just don't get all hanky-panky in front of me. Okay. Sorry. I can't handle men kissing. Well, I'm still working on it.
What about Morsi? You said you liked Morsi, but
I didn't like him.
Hate?
Okay. So he was Muslim Brotherhood. He was too, whitewashed for us. He was still wanting democracy.
Yes, that's what
he was good. The Muslim Brotherhood. See, when I moved to Egypt, I moved to a town where it was predominantly Muslim Brotherhood, and I really liked the women. And they didn't know a whole lot about Islam, but they all spoke French and English, and they were very sophisticated women, and I liked them. They were the crowd that was hanging around, and so that town, John didn't like it because they were too moderate. But okay, back to Morsi. Morsi was allowing, the Muslim Brotherhood were allowing, they were encouraging the population, the entire country, to go fight in Syria to help their brethren. And I completely understood that. I was like, yeah, we have to defeat Bashar. There was no talk of a caliphate so much, but it was just about going to help. And I supported that. John was calling people, his followers, to go fight. And,
did he ever fight?
He wanted to. I was holding him back. I held him back from the time we got to Egypt. I wouldn't let him go because I was telling him, look, bills need to be paid. You keep making me pregnant. The more pregnant you make me, the more dependent I am on you. And he knew that. And he did that on purpose because he wanted to keep me in my place. Because I wanted to not have so many children so quickly. I wanted to also pursue a career, but he didn't want me to be an independent woman. So, by keeping me pregnant and nursing and a carer for my children, he kept me in my place, and it made it more and more difficult for me to leave. And he knew that I was fed up with him. So where am I trying to get to?
You're in Egypt now.
You're in Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood. You mentioned,
yes.
Yeah, go.
So then John wanted to move from Al Rihab city, and we moved to the north coast by the Mediterranean Sea. And he was like, oh, we're going to go to the Mediterranean Sea. Our son's going to be able to swim. You're going to love it. He made it sound, and he said, Cleopatra's from there. We can see a bathhouse. He made it sound okay, right? So I went there. And then I realized, I was like, God, have we come to Afghanistan? It's horrible. It is so primitive. And men were carrying guns, and there were posters of Bin Laden, and women were all in black, and they couldn't do anything because they couldn't see. So they had people
in Egypt
them everywhere. Yeah, in Egypt. This is on the north coast. It's about 3 hours away from Libya.
Oh.
And wow. 2 hours away from Alexandria. So the only good thing was we're by the Mediterranean Sea, walking distance. So we had a beach home. But it was winter time, and that was really depressing for me because it just rained all the time. Mm. And then I hated it because Egypt, they don't pick up the trash, and everybody was saying it's because there's no government. But anyway, so what happened? Eventually we left that city. But okay, so the town is called Mersi Matruh. And in Mersi Matruh, it's famous for being a tourist destination for Egyptians, but they smuggle, the black market there is huge. They smuggle hashish, they smuggle guns, and they smuggle jihadists. And they smuggle them from Libya all the way to Syria. And that was the big business that was going on there at the time while I was there. So we had jihadists coming in and out in our house from Europe, and they all knew my husband, and they liked him a lot, and they were big fans.
Because he was American?
He had a website about the establishment of a caliphate and the requirements of who could be a caliph. It was a very scholarly website, and it was from the Zahiri fiqh, which is Ibn Hazm. If you're familiar with Ibn Hazm, his school of thought, it's supposed to be the most logical school of thought because they reject qiyas, which is analogical deduction. They reject urf, which is cultural customs. They're like the most libertarian.
Isn't it Zahiri? Wasn't he like a Zahiri, which means that
the literalists. It says literalists, but it actually should mean linguistics. The literal translation is literalists, but they're the linguists of Arabic. They really care. They decide the dictionaries, and not just the dictionaries, but they like poetry. Pre-Islamic poetry defines the language used in the Quran.
So your husband went from somebody that doesn't speak Christian, that doesn't speak Arabic, to somebody that knows classical Arabic inside out?
Absolutely. And he knew Arabic better than all the Arabs. They used to say that. He'd memorized dictionaries. He'd memorized the first Arabic dictionary and the first Arabic grammar books. They were written by Sibawayh wrote the book of grammar, and Al-Khalil wrote the first Arabic dictionary.
Where is he now?
I don't know exactly. Last year he was by the Euphrates in Raqqa.
Oh, he's free.
Yeah, he was free. And he, at the time, so he had 2 daughters with his Syrian wife, and they were in an area that he couldn't tell me where he was because of security reasons.
Wait, he's still in touch with you?
No, he was a year ago. I haven't heard from him.
Is there any security? Are you scared at all that somebody might come after you because of all your everything you're doing and saying and your activism?
That's why I won't go to England because of that. I'm afraid someone might throw acid in my face because I've heard that happens over there.
There's a lot of crazy shit happening in England. But so this is I'd also kind of read about John, your ex-husband, that he was pretty instrumental in influencing European and Western converts, Muslim converts, to come and fight for ISIS. So is this apparently they looked at him?
How high up is he was he when it was in Al Qaeda?
Well, he was
ISIS. Yeah. Sorry, how high?
Yeah. He would never admit any of that to me, but he did tell me when he was the editor of Dabiq and Rumiyah, he would send me articles.
Dabiq, by the way, everybody, is the official, the publication of ISIS, or was the official publication of ISIS. And he apparently, a lot of it was very well written and very well published and edited. And
because of him?
Because of him. He is right now, currently, if he's still alive, he's the highest ranking member of ISIS, American member of ISIS.
But so because of how good these articles were, a lot of people they managed to recruit a lot of people. So he's actually he single-handedly is responsible for a lot of people joining ISIS.
Yeah. He's very influential. I think to the extent that. Oh, I'm sorry, Tanya.
I was just going to say that when he left me and when he decided to stay in Syria, the first thing I did was go online and say, please, people, do not follow him. What happened? 6 other guys went and left their families and joined him. So they were just copycatting him. That copycat thing that they do. Like, they thought, well, if he can do it, we can do it. And that's what happens. That's how people, got drawn into it.
What are you doing now? What are you doing now? Are you right now involved in any kind of like anti-jihad activism or stuff like that?
I work for an NGO called Against Violent Extremism. It's like an offshoot of CVE, Countering Violent.
Yeah.
Yes. And then ISD funds it, ISD is based in London. It's the Institute of Strategic Dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're planning to do is we have a prison program where we go into prisons and get volunteers. Where I'm hoping to reach out to Jihad Jane and Kaylin Young, these women who were planning to go join ISIS, and try and help them, rehabilitate them, give their identities back, or give them an identity where they can come back to society and help.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. No, that's amazing. And I think I saw your website too. It's TanyaJoya.com, and we'll put that in the description for people who want to check it out. I wanted to
website. I want to make that clear because it's kind of okay. Daily Mail said that I'm bragging in it, but I didn't write it. Okay.
Forget the Daily Mail. Wait. Aren't you supposed to brag on your own website? Isn't that like?
I don't know. I'm supposed to. I guess they want me to be humble. I don't know.
No, well, we brag all the time. It's so sorry. We keep on getting going. I mean, this is really, really fascinating. So we keep on going on tangents, but I just kind of want. So you end up, so you're in Egypt, and I'm just trying to get to Syria, and then when you left Syria and went into Turkey, because that story is actually really.
Should I tell you how I got from Egypt to Turkey first?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, please do.
Okay. So we're in Egypt, and then the coup happened. The military coup, and they were rounding up any Islamists they could in the streets. I was living in Nasser City at the time where the protests was happening, and we could hear people getting shot at every night. We had helicopters flying over us, shooting at us. It was so frightening, and it just was driving me mad, really, and scaring my kids. I was scared. I would have all my kids in my bed and not let them near the windows because I was so afraid they'd get shot. Anyway, so anyone who was the foreigners who were not Islamists, who weren't Muslims, they were being rounded up and imprisoned for being spies. And if you were clearly like an Islamist man dressed with a beard and a thobe, they would say you were Al-Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood and take you to jail. So John and I were afraid, and our neighbors turned on us and were not liking us because we're foreigners. Everyone became very xenophobic at that time in Egypt. And they wanted Americans out. So we left to go to Turkey, and he wanted to go to Sudan, and I wasn't happy about going to Sudan because I was like, it's too hot for me and I'm pregnant. I can't handle that. So I said, Turkey's a nice climate and it's close to Europe. And, so we went to Istanbul, and that was lovely, and I wanted to stay there. And he was like, no, they don't speak Arabic here. But if we move to the east, the Asian side, he doesn't have to learn Turkish, and we can just speak to people in Arabic over there. So he took me to the eastern side. We were supposed to go to Antioch. Then the taxi driver advised us not to do that because there's too many naked women on the beach and no sheikh should go there. And then, over there you get we don't have Google. We asked the taxi drivers what to do. It's just terrible.
Just want to let people know that Turkey is a large Muslim majority country that has nude beaches. So,
but isn't a sheikh? Wouldn't a sheikh be more immune?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Wouldn't a sheikh be more immune than the average person from these temptations? So I think he should be.
Oh, yeah. I would think so. I mean, my John would. I don't know. But anyway, he was just saying it's not a good place for us. Yeah. So he told us to go Gaziantep. I had no idea what Gaziantep was like. I went over there and saw it was just a city full of refugees. And I was like, I was getting nervous, and I was like, what are you doing? Why are we here? It sounds really uncouth, but I was like, I don't like being around these refugees. Let's go back to Istanbul. And he was like, no, it's too expensive. I told you, I'm not going to learn Turkish. I don't have time for that. You see, at the time he was translating for the Ministry of Endowment for the government of Qatar. Qatar was outsourcing their fatwas to Egypt, and he would translate it. But he could do this job from anywhere.
For the government of Qatar?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't they know his history?
They didn't know, and they didn't care. They knew that he got arrested for trying to hack into an AIPAC website. But if you go over to that part of the world, they think you're a hero for doing that.
So they weren't
this
is the pro-US government.
This story is insane.
This is insane.
No, but so go on.
You should make a movie about this. You should write a book about this and turn it into a movie.
That's why I'm nervous. I'm telling you everything that's going on in the book, which isn't a good idea for me. But
no, it's great. No. It'll raise the hype around it. People are going to look forward to
it.
So I'm hoping to have a book out before next Christmas, and we'll see what happens.
All right.
So we're in Turkey, and then we were looking for a place to live, and we were expecting money wired to us from Egypt, from a different sheikh, who's a really famous sheikh, like Qadawi, but Egyptian. Qadawi was Egyptian, but he moved to Qatar. Anyway, I'm going off the topic. So this prominent scholar from Egypt was meant to send us money, so that we could find a house to live in Turkey. But, so we went to the the housing, real estate, and they said everything's taken and they have to give first priority to all the refugees. And then we went to the hotels and all the hotels were full. Then the only thing that was left was a hostel, and I refused to sleep in the hostel because I was like, the people were very nice. The Syrians are always nice. But I was like, this is disgusting. I can't even use the bathroom here. I just wanted to go home, and, I just wanted to go back to Egypt, to my house, and I'd lost everything. So it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and we're standing outside the hostel, the Syrian hostel, and I'm with my kids, three kids who were 8, 4, and 1.5. And then I was 5 months pregnant, and we're there with our luggage, and then a bus pulls up, and there were no taxis at that time, so we couldn't even leave the town with a taxi. And then the bus pulls up, just like coincidentally. I was just happy to see transport. And then John went and spoke to the guy and said, get on the bus. We got somewhere to go. He'll take us somewhere. It's just temporary until I get money. And so I went on the bus. I didn't question. I was just relieved to sit down and sleep. And then we got to the checkpoint, and then I saw where I was, and I knew what he was doing. And I said, as a Muslim woman, I had been trained not to make a scene and, like yell at him in public and things. So I was fuming mad with him, and he knew it. I was at the point where I was so mad I wasn't even talking to him, and I was telling my son, tell your dad this. Tell him I hate him.
Wait, what happened? Where were you? Where were you?
I was at the UN checkpoint to cross the border to go to Syria.
Oh, shit.
From Turkey.
But I just didn't, there was like nothing I could do because like I didn't know how to, like since I was 19, I just depended on him because I was always pregnant and with babies and nursing, and like it was just constant. And I didn't even have like money of my own to just get away from him and go somewhere. And I had no family support either. So I was like, okay. And he just kept telling me, you love Syria. And I'm like, yeah, I love Damascus. I'll go. I know for years we argued about this because he wanted to go join the jihad in Syria. He felt obliged, and I felt obliged for him too. But I said, jihad is supposed to go on until the day of judgment. You can go when we're 40. You can go when my kids are not so dependent on me, and, go die. You do what you like after 40, but just let my kids grow up a bit. Because I can't do this on my own. They need 2 parents. So he always felt like I was holding him back and using my children to hold him back. And that's a pretty good reason to hold back from going to jihad or leaving your family. But he saw that as a fitna. Allah says in the Quran that your wives and your children are fitna.
Explain fitna to the people.
Fitna, like a temptation and,
source of corruption.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That will hold you back from your religion.
So you teach this, and listen, people, in this ideology, they teach you that your wife and your children are a source of corruption, and you should listen to them.
Yeah, distracting you from the faith. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
So I was distracting him from the path of Allah that Allah had chosen for him and for all the men. He saw it as jihad. It was fard. It was compulsory jihad. It was a jihad that men, women, and children have to fight because they're being attacked. It's not like it's defensive. It's defensive. It's not offensive. It's only offensive jihad where women and children don't have to fight. And, I couldn't argue with that.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that? In offensive?
There are 2 types of jihad. So when it's offensive means when you go attack, right? So when the Muslim army is attacking a nation, it's offensive, and women and children don't have to take part in that. But it is mandatory on men to serve at some point. and for defensive jihad, when we're being attacked by outsiders, or there's a tyrant like Bashar al-Assad then it involves the whole Muslim community to come together and fight every single individual.
Women have to pick up arms as well, like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was taught. But
and this is based on stories around Muhammad's life, like basically trying to see exactly what happened during his life and basically trying to copy that exactly. Right?
Yes, and then there was the consensus of the Sahaba, that's 10,000 companions of the Prophet. Whenever they agreed on something, it became ijma. It became a point of consensus.
Right, and because Muhammad said that the people of my community will never agree on something that's a mistake, right?
Exactly, yes. So the problem was I felt like, I was like, okay, this is going to sound awful, but I'm going to be very honest how I used to think. I used to say, let the Salafis and send their kids to go fight. You know, my kids are too smart. My kids are really very smart. And, I was like, let them be the brains behind the war. I'm fine with them being commanders and generals or whatever, but I don't want to put them on the front lines. And he was like, well, they can't become commanders and generals unless they fight. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want them to fight when they're children. I don't want them strapping bombs or holding a gun that might blow back on them, like.
But he wanted the kids to go in and start fighting from an early age.
He wouldn't say he does, but he would say, that's one of the reasons why he let me go. You see, when, like, everyone asked, why did he let you go? There are so many Muslim men that wouldn't have let you leave. And
it's so sweet that the way you say, like, even if you're a jihadi mom, you're like, yeah, my kids could go do jihad, but let the other ones go die. My kids should be general.
Well, they were brutes. I used to see
it's so sweet that you want to protect your children. Like, and I don't know, I see something. And
my kids are nerdy. They're really they get honors and all that.
My kids are generals.
Anyway,
they're like, I would in Egypt. We would go to Egypt, and the kids were so like, they had so much energy, and they would just fight constantly. Like, they had so much energy, and that was okay. But for me and my kids, we were like scared. We were like. My kids didn't want to fight with other kids their age. They just didn't know. They weren't raised that way. I had been an overprotective mother. I just never let them get rowdy.
Yeah. So you were saying that John wanted, he did want the kids to fight to join the jihad.
If they have to, they would. But see, they were very small.
But yeah, again, you were talking about why he let you go.
Okay, yeah. So since he had deceived me, and so he took me to Syria, and he said, it's only 2 weeks, you can handle 2 weeks. And I said, okay, I can handle 2 weeks. Then he came, and then after 2 weeks I realized he wasn't going anywhere. He was getting phone calls from all his buddies that were there, and they were like, yeah, we're so happy to have you. And the locals were like, yeah, we need your skill set, we need people who can use computers and speak English and translate and give fatwas. They needed people like that. Then I was like, well, I need you too. I need you to pay my bills and my children's bills and take care of us. And then I wasn't saying it so nicely at the time. I was crying and screaming and stuff and upset. And then so we got into this big argument, and then he said, okay, leave. And then so I was happy, and I said, okay, but take me to the airport at least. And he was like, no, I reported him to the authorities as soon as I got to Syria and I got hold of a phone, I called the authorities and I told them, he's done this and I need help. Otherwise, you're not going to just have one American jihadist. You're going to end up having 5 American jihadists,
because
of my kids being American.
Oh.
Wow. Yeah, so wait, you reported him in Syria when you went in?
Mm-hmm. When I got in, I got a phone.
Reported to who?
I don't want to say who. I can't say.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sure. I just called an agent. I explained what happened, and I said, please help me and my children. And they said, there's nothing we can do for you inside of Syria. You've got to get across the border, and we'll help you as much as we can from there.
So they said they can't help you in Syria, and you have to get out of Syria.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, I was ready to leave any day, but there were always blockades. So,
did John know that you'd reported him?
Yeah, he was standing right there watching me.
Oh, so in the middle of an argument.
Oh, yeah, I don't think we ever had a calm discussion while in the last weeks of our marriage. It was just
he was
tears.
I didn't get that. He was watching you when you made the report?
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah, they were in the middle of a fight.
We were in a courtyard, in in a Beit al-Arabi, an
so how
Arabic
come he didn't
house.
stop you?
Because I don't know. I mean, the only thing he could do was beat me. I was pregnant, and I was like, don't do that again in front of my kids, so.
You seem like a force to be reckoned with. So, like seriously, like the way, I mean, a lot of people, if I was in your shoe, I would just keep my head down and just say yes to everybody.
I don't think you would do. Not when you have children involved. I don't think you would.
That was funny.
I was even when I was in Syria, I was arguing with the young mujahideen there because they were telling John, your wife needs a cover, because I was just wearing a headscarf and I was wearing, loose fitting clothes, but it wasn't a jilbab. I wasn't wearing a robe and I wasn't covering my face. And I said, if I can go on Hajj and not cover my face, now, why do I have to cover my face here? And when I pray, I'm not allowed to cover my face. But you're going to make me cover my face every time I leave the house.
Because you're in war. Isn't that the reason? Because you're in war? Isn't
that's exactly what they said. Yeah. They said that. They said, well, this is a time of jihad and fitna. If you want to get raped, don't wear it. But if you go out not covering your face, you're asking for it. And for me, that was
Armin, you know your stuff. Like you make a good jihadist.
Well, no, he's great. Like you're reminding me about all these sayings that I suppressed over the years. But it's good. No, we're a good team. So I was arguing about my rights, and I was saying, I'm pregnant. You can't expect me to wear that. I can't breathe. And then John, he was just like, I'm so fed up with her. I can't deal with her. And, for me, so I was 29 at the time when I was in Syria. And I was looking at these jihadist guys, and they were like young men in their early 20s, maybe teens. And they're just like, they're young. Some of them are very good looking, very buff. But I was like, you guys are like, you can't tell me how to dress. You're like little boys to me, that's all I kept saying. I was like, because I have a brother that age, and I was like, no one that age is going to tell me what to wear. I've just had 4 boys. I am the mother, the goddess of sons. You do not tell me what to wear. I was just so mad. And some of them thought it was funny. But others were like, like, Yahya, put your Abu Hassan, they would call him, set your wife straight. And he was just like, he just put his hands in there and said, I cannot do anything about her.
But they're considered crazy. Superior. Like, if, for example, if your husband was killed and you were a widow, then if you even have like a 5-year-old son, he would have authority over you, wouldn't he? Like, he would have to, if you're getting married, he would have to marry you, give his blessings for you to get married. If there was no other male in your family, like that's how inferior women are. Right?
It would be in charge of the Qadi would be in charge of me, the judge, and then I would have to decide to marry somebody else because there's no other option of survival for women in that situation. They just go from husband to husband. It's very sad. So down like cattle.
So what happens after you report? So after you report him, how does it actually lead to you leaving?
Okay, so we made the crossing, and the crossing was very difficult going back to Turkey because the fighting between the militia groups had grown stronger. It was at the time it was the FSA fighting a different
Free Syrian Army, right?
Yeah, Free Syrian Army at the time were fighting the Islamist groups. They weren't ISIS at the time. It was right after I left that ISIS reached the area that I was in. It was Azaz. It's called Azaz, the town. And so there was a lot of fighting between the Islamist, and they were a lot of the guys I saw. They were foreigners. They were mainly from Tunisia. And then there were the Syrian jihadis, and then there were all the locals who were just in between. And they just wanted stability, and all they wanted was like, they would take any side that was able to handle the trash problem and secure the safety of the people. So, when I left Syria, it was 3 weeks after getting there, and I had to, run across landmine fields, but luckily there was like a track. It'd tell me there were directions, which were good. Directions, which way to go. I had to follow the track, a lot of running, and I'm pregnant, but I was always a fit pregnant woman. And then I had to put my children through a barbed wire there was a barbed fence, and somebody had cut a hole out of it. And it was very small, but I had to pass all my children through it, and then I had to go through it. Then John gave me the stroller and our luggage. Then we had to run a bit more and get onto this human trafficking truck. John paid the guy a few $100s, told him to take me to the bus station. And then I was off, and it was just like, there was no time to think. Everything was very hurried. Everything was panicked. I didn't have drinking water with me. Some Syrian refugees gave water to my kids. I was having contractions, and it was too early to be having contractions because I was only five and a half months pregnant. So I was in a great deal of pain while on the human trafficking truck that was riding. It was going so fast, and we weren't even on a road, so it was really bumpy. And then I had to cry out to the driver, "I'm pregnant." And then the other refugees were like, "Slow down, the woman's pregnant." I was the only woman there. And then, so the driver stopped before getting to the station, but he spoke Turkish, and I didn't understand anything he was saying. And I didn't understand that he couldn't go near the bus station because he'd be arrested. So all the other refugees scattered, they went all different areas. And then I just started walking with my kids. And I was on the phone to John because the phone connection still worked. And I was just telling him how I hate him and he's a motherfucker going to hell and all this stuff. I was just mad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. This is, this is like the timeline's interesting here because 2013, you leave and now he's kind of on his own. Mm-hmm. And he became huge after that. So apparently, and, Armin, I don't know if you know this, but what John did, or Yahya, as he's known, is that he was very close to, one of the leading commanders in ISIS, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani. And with him, they actually pressured Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi to declare the caliphate earlier than they wanted to. In fact, like he was saying, sorry?
They said they threatened to fight Baghdadi. They said to Baghdadi.
Wow. And Baghdadi eventually.
Yeah, he relented.
He relented, and then after Baghdadi became convinced by John's efforts to declare the caliphate earlier, after that, John pledged allegiance to Baghdadi. So he was actually, he became really high up there. I mean, he was
so
quite
he was more radical than Baghdadi.
In terms of declaring a caliphate, yeah. So he had that. He kind of went head to head with Baghdadi and really put the pressure.
How is he not captured? This is like this guy seems too important for the CIA not to have been track him down already and put him in a cell somewhere like this.
I'm sure they've tried. I mean, I'm sure they've been trying.
Is it really that hard to get somebody like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. He's look at the most wanted list.
I would love so much I would be at peace if they could just tell me if he's dead or if he's captured. But not knowing is so hard because it means like.
Yas actually says the same thing. But here's a question. How come he was still helping you with water and money after you reported? This was after you reported him, right?
Yeah, we were still married. He didn't know that I had stopped praying. I wasn't going to tell him that.
But would he not support you?
Like, I wanted child support. I wanted child support from him, and he was getting other people from the UK. He was getting all his followers to send me money.
Do you think that no matter what you did, he still wished you well? Like, he just still had an emotional attachment that he didn't want you to?
His love always told me he loves me. Even though I tell him exactly what I think. And I just tell him that Satan's not real, honey. I just would always tell him what I've learned, and
You told him Satan is not real.
Mm-hmm.
I
tried to explain it. I was trying to help him. Like, even if he came back to the United States, I would feel obliged to try and help rehabilitate him because I feel like it's really important, even to the victims, to have the perpetrators feel remorseful for what they've done, just like I feel remorseful. And other
how did you become like a person that doesn't believe in the devil and where you're in the heart of this whole thing? Like, what, like, were you reading books or like watching YouTube videos? Like, what kind of what influenced
it? It was Thomas Paine. Sorry, Thomas Paine freed my mind. I love him.
Oh, Thomas Paine.
Wait, you were reading Thomas Paine when you were in where? Like when you were in Egypt, in Syria?
So in Egypt, I became familiar with him through Facebook quotes, the memes. Like, I was like, he would have
all of the stuff you do. Have you heard of Atheist Republic?
Oh, great.
What?
So I was like, I would read them and I was like, hey, he's got me thinking. And I would say to John, I said, John, do you know who Thomas Paine is? I really like what he says. He was like, yeah, I read his books in prison. He's good, but he's not a Muslim, so just forget it. And
Guys, by the way, all the meme haters out there that think that memes don't work, I mean,
that helped me question. And the thing is, what I love about Thomas Paine is that I had all the same questions that he had, like all the beliefs, but I was so afraid to just say it. And I didn't have just every time I'd be like pressured to stop thinking and shut up.
Did you read the comment section of people arguing with each other about these quotes?
I don't think so.
No?
I was like 3.5 kids. I was limited time on the computer.
Did you see any Atheist Republic memes at all? Like, did you notice our page at all?
If I did, I would have just ignored it. I wouldn't have liked it. Because I was still on the fence. I was still like, I don't want to be an atheist. Plus, living in Texas, I feel there's a lot of like stigma about being an atheist. And even like, I'm not a full-on Republican. I'm not a full-on Democrat, but I can't share that here. I can't say I'm not a Republican. Otherwise, my neighbors started like, they were Trump supporters. Really tough. It's really tough.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to highlight what you just said. So you were under, you were in Syria, you were in Egypt, and now you're in Texas, and you're afraid of Republicans.
Yes. Ostracizing me. Yeah.
So, oh my God, I have a tiny. I know we're kind of running short on time, and we're probably over.
There's
but
so many questions.
I have so many questions, but if you just have a little, I just wanted to kind of bring up a couple of things that are said. So, you had, were you there in Syria, or when John remarried, or did he remarry after you had left?
Okay. I'll tell you how bad he is. 3 months after I left, a week after I gave birth to our 4th son, he got married again.
Okay. Did you know that he was going to? Was he already?
No, he didn't tell me until he kept it a secret from me for over 1.5 years. He had a child with her. She was pregnant with her 2nd daughter by the time he told me. And that was the time where I said, oh, John, I think I'm ready to move on and get a divorce. I'm so sorry. I love you, but I can't be with you. And there I am feeling guilty, and he's already married and has a child.
Did you feel upset about that? The fact that he got remarried and had a child?
I was heartbroken. I was like, if you're going to go fight jihad, don't go have babies and sentence them to death. So, that was what killed me. How irresponsible. And all he could say is, this is God's qadr. This is God's destiny. No responsibility, not owning up to any responsibility for what's happened.
It's always an easy way out, using God.
But the other thing is that there's also, some of the criticism, there's a lot of criticism of you. They're saying that, well, you made a mistake and you should pay for it, and all this. So there's all of that out there. But there's another thing about how there was some website where you were still sort of liking his posts, or you were still kind of engaging with him in some way or another. Do you want to clarify that?
That might have been a long time ago. That might have been like, I don't know what time period that was. I don't remember liking his posts after I came to the US. I don't recall that, because he was blocking me from any website, because every website, every Twitter and Facebook account he had, I would report him. because I was angry. I was an angry wife after him. I was like, no, I'm not going to let you keep spreading your message. I'm going to report you. And that's all I was doing. So he'd block me first before I could report him.
I think for a lot of people, this is like, they see it as him being ISIS and you're not being ISIS. But for you, it's a little bit different than that. This is your ex-husband. This is the father of your children. It goes more emotional than just, this is,
I grew up with him.
Yeah.
So I met him when we were just turned 19, and we left each other when we were 29. We didn't really have anybody. We were like one person, and one person in conflict. But we really did love each other because, I don't know, we just did. We had children, and it meant so much to us.
Do you think he misses you?
Yeah, he misses. He better miss me. He even used to tell me he misses me, but he used to always tell me, come back to Syria. And, when ISIS was doing well and they were the wealthiest terrorist organization in the world, he was like, I noticed he had rings on his fingers. He had a ring each and on his hand. And I said, hey, you never gave me a single piece of jewelry while we were married. How do you have 2 rings on your hand? And he said, come to Sham and I'll give you a ring for every finger. And I was like, are you kidding? I'm not that stupid.
But none of them gold. None of them gold, right? Gold is haram for men, right?
No, it was platinum.
It was platinum. But how can you, so I don't know if you can talk, can you talk about how you used to communicate with him when ISIS was doing really well? Skype?
No. So Skype, and then when he joined ISIS, it was more of, we would use Telegram.
Yes, Telegram, because that's double end encrypted, right? So if you use Skype, CIA could locate where you are. But if you use Telegram or WhatsApp, those are impossible to hack, right?
And just to make it clear, everything I had, whenever I was visited by the authorities, I would be completely honest and open. And, I'm going to put my safety first. I gave them everything that I had, voluntarily. Because I owed America. America let me have a second chance. They let me back in the country. They didn't have to. They could have let me die in Syria. But they were supportive.
They gave you a chance because you said you're going to help, you appealed to them. Did they see you as an asset, as a way to, is that, you think, or you not want to get into that?
No, but I was never it's not like I saw them often, but when I did have something, I was, happy to help because, as cheesy as this sounds, the United States government was the parent I never had. It's really sad because America doesn't want to be a nanny state, but I didn't have good parents in the first place. It was America that gave me the possibility to change and be who I want to be. And who I want to be was when I lived with my family, it was, I had to be like them, but that was, that would have held me back, further.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think with the whole Trump thing? Where do you stand with do you think he's helping this whole issue, or do you think he's hurting it?
No, he's not helping anything or anyone except himself.
So I guess we're all
a business, and if he's seeing it as a business, he's looking to profit off it. Mm-hmm. Not America, not the whole America.
I'm trying to do the fast fire questions because I just want to get this. One of the things that I read that was actually really harrowing was that you have 4 sons, and you said that you did want them to raise them to be like commanders and to in the jihad and so on. But then generals. One of them, generals. Okay, Armin, generals. And then one of them came to you once with a grenade, an old grenade.
When we were living in Mersi Matruh, near the north coast of Egypt by the Mediterranean, they were, like I said, the men were carrying guns. They were radical. It was free terrain. It was like living in the Wild West, and the police were afraid of the residents. And so just outside my house, I lived in a villa. Just outside the villa, John and the neighbors would shoot guns, shoot birds. And it was so frightening because I needed earmuffs or something, but every time they shot a gun, I'd go nuts. And then they would let my children out there and they weren't being safe. You know, they weren't taking the proper safety precautions. The grenade wasn't working, but I just freaked out when I saw it. And it's just the fact that, like, there was even one kid, one of the neighbor's kids, who grabbed a gun and shot it, and something happened, but he nearly shot himself. And and my son was close by, and I was just infuriated. And, you know, John used to have BB guns in the house. He wouldn't keep weapons because he was afraid I would use it on him. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
But we had a huge villa, and so I could practice with BB guns inside the house because it was so big. And that was the most I ever tried. That was the most.
Did you see anything? All of the images that we've seen on the news of all the horrific stuff that's happening in Syria with ISIS, and you know, where I guess, you know, your ex-husband is one of the commanders, or one of the sort of leading figures there. Did you ever? How close were you to that stuff when you were there? Or were you relatively protected from it?
Oh, like, you know, I wasn't near it. I mean, when I came back to the US, I started hearing about the sex slavery with the teenage girls and the Yazidis, and I asked John about that, and he would just. The thing is, it's like, I guess it's like how Republicans are with Trump. You know, he just started defending every bad thing that ISIS was doing because they're paying his salary. You know, just like Trump is paying the salary of all these Republicans and.
But how would you defend it? Like, how would you defend
comparison? Like the
well, hey,
they're both right wing and extremists.
But how did he defend?
We just lost half of our. Yeah, go ahead.
No. So that's fine. It doesn't matter. We're having a conversation here. But how did he defend the sex slavery and everything? Just through scripture and hadith and everything, because I mean it is endorsed.
And always making out like it's not as bad as you hear. It's just Western propaganda to make you hate us.
That's actually a very good question. Was it mostly hadith, Islamic ideology, or was it politics, or U.S. did this to us, so they deserve it?
But you're saying that he denied. He just said that a lot of it's just Western propaganda, right? That it wasn't.
No. But I'm just saying the way he would justify his actions, was it because that this is what Islam? What?
I mean, even slavery was, we saw it as something okay in Islam. But the way we looked at it through rosy colored glasses. We thought, you know, in comparative to Americans' history with slavery, there wasn't racism involved. There wasn't, you know, supposedly there's no racism in Islam. And, you know, there's, you know, slaves, like you had the Mamluks who were slaves who controlled the government, and they helped Al-Andalus against the Crusaders. Yep. Slaves had such a higher, you know, slavery is wrong. I understand. I get it now because I don't have God telling me what to think. But
God, you're just full of quotes. That's another quote.
Yeah. But so the justifications were mostly theological, not political. That's what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yeah.
So he really believed this stuff.
Yes. But I don't think he never heard an argument other than me arguing with him. He didn't have anyone confronting his arguments. Okay, so he was part of a political group called Vox Populi, which is a Facebook debate forum on politics. So he had friends before going to ISIS. He had Jewish friends, or not friends, but acquaintances, gay supporters, Catholic right wings. He would teach them about Sharia law and teach them about the jizya and about Zahiri fiqh and how libertarian it is, small government.
Just to explain, jizya is a tax that's imposed on non-Muslims living in Muslim places.
Anyway, just certain non-Muslims, just Christians and Jews, but all policies, Hindus, atheists would be slaughtered. Yeah. So he would say, you know, and they were like, oh, you make it sound so nice. You know, if there was any Islamic state, we'd be happy to pay the jizya. You know, they would say that to him. And he was even very compassionate to gays. Like, he would be able to talk them over. And even though they would say, look, here's the scientific evidence for being gay, and this is in our DNA, and he would explain it, they would explain it to him, and then he would come back with something like, okay, well, if you're a gay man, marry a dyke, marry a woman who's very masculine. You know, he would try and help them that way. And he was like,
who was challenging him? People in Syria were challenging him on gay rights?
Americans on Facebook.
Saying right-wing Catholics and all this stuff. Yeah, there you go.
They were like, but he was making it sound, you know, he was a con artist. He was extremely confident. And he was, you know, if he hadn't been a Muslim, everybody thinks he would have been a lawyer. But in Islam, he's considered Islamic jurisprudence. So
but technically, he's not a con artist because he believed in his own bullshit, right?
Yeah. He only conned me because he would convince me of something and then go back on the promises. So that, like,
that's amazing. So now you, the reports that you go to Unitarian Church, but it's also said that, you know, you don't belong to any religion. Where are you at now after all of this?
I said in the last interview that I don't care about God, I care about humans. Because I spent thank you.
Yeah,
there's so many years of my life that I was like, I had to find a truth, and I had to find about God, and I want to find out, because I was so afraid about an afterlife. And then I didn't want to believe, when I was young, I didn't want to believe that this is it. This is all there is.
Yeah.
That was so depressing for me. I was like, I want to live forever. I want to live eternally. And I'm okay with not having much in this world if it means I get to live in paradise in the next world. But when that, you know, deception was clear to me, I had to go crazy first, and then I was recovered. You know, it takes time.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I'm just absolutely fascinated to hear the story. I think there's so much that people can learn from you if they bother to talk to you not the way that Piers Morgan did, but he
wasn't interested in learning anything. He was just interested in spreading his own message. He was just
cornering me. He's just a showman. He's not a journalist. I don't see him as that's not.
That was one of the worst things I've seen so many bad interviews of him, but that was one of the worst ones.
Yeah, that was actually
he had no interest in your opinion. He was only interested in his own opinion.
Yeah, he kind of wanted to, it seemed like, because I remember a while ago he was saying something about just comparing Islam and Scientology. He's like, Islam's a great religion, but Scientology is a cult. And I'm like, what's the only difference between a cult and a religion is the size of the group, right? And but in any case, I just think that
Islam's a great religion. Islam would kill him. You know, if Islamists were in charge, they would kill him. Straight up. How can he support that? How can he say
a lot of the people here who support, huh?
Well, unless he's a Christian, then he has to pay the jizya. Ahlul Kitab.
Right. So what we're doing is like,
does he say he's a Christian? Does he say he's a? I mean, it depends if he's a Christian.
I don't know. I have no idea. But in any case,
something. There's always a reason to kill someone in Islam. I'll lash them. You know what it is? If he drinks alcohol 3 times, he gets killed. So
there you go.
Okay, there's always a reason to kill somebody in Islam. Okay, another quote.
It's like, that's a Tanya Joya quote. That's not going to be controversial at all. Make a meme out of it. So,
I know. I'm just too outspoken.
So
don't change.
Yeah, no, this is really good. I think that the fact that you've been through all of this, and you've been so close to pretty much the leadership of, you know, the biggest terrorist organization in the world, and coming from there, you've come back and you've become an advocate for humanism, for countering violent extremism, and and human rights. I think that it just shows how much potential there is for people to change. And you did it influenced by people like Thomas Paine and internet memes. I mean, those things, they matter.
You know, by the founding fathers. Because, you know, I didn't have the Sahaba to go to anymore, the companions of the Prophet. I couldn't go to what they were saying because I'm so into like historians and anything old and classical. So I went to the founding fathers to look. I wanted to find out their religion because I really respected them. And I found out many of them were deists. I wasn't into the Trinitarian. So I was like, okay, deists, I like what they think. And then that took, by studying deism, and then it took me further, into humanism and existentialism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's something that continues. It keeps going.
And you're surrounded by Republicans right now, so you can't really go out and say you're an atheist, right?
I really can't. It's not popular. I've been told to leave Texas by my neighbors.
Yeah, there's well, what are you going to do? But
I'm going to go to DC. I hope.
So I'm glad where you are. I'm happy for your kids. Happy you got out of that situation. It's just happy you did the podcast.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. I enjoy the conversation a lot. And there's going to be a lot of criticism. We're going to get a lot of flack for it, which is a lot of fun. So, please, everybody bring it on.
You can't make everyone happy.
You can't, clearly. So, can you tell people again? I mean, I mentioned TanyaJoya.com, your website. Where else can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Or
Twitter, I'm at Tanya at JoyaGeo7. So I'll spell that. It's at JoyaGeo7.
Mm-hmm. And we'll put that in the description as well.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the description.
Yeah, and Facebook too. I'm pretty open as long as everyone's willing to hear my emotional rants. I'm on Facebook all the time, and
that's what Facebook's for.
I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm like, I had a bad day. Woe's me.
Well, you were talking about starting your own religion. I mean, that's how all the other religions started, with emotional rants, right? I mean, if it wasn't for emotional rants, you wouldn't have any of this stuff. So,
I need to get your book.
You have so what's your book is going to be called for people that might be interested?
Well, I'm thinking the title will be Shedding Skins is the title, but I'll explain what that means. It's like, the way I see it is like how a snake sheds their skin in one piece, they slough. And I feel like I've done that with my identity, from changing from being a normal teenager and a British Bengali girl to becoming a radical Islamist to being a humanist. Every time I had to sort of shed my identity.
You put on Facebook you say the libertarian. Is that you? Is that the one?
Yeah, that's me. I mean, I'm really angry with the libertarians right now because ever since they've been supporting Trump and supporting Bashar, a dictator and they call the protesters terrorists. It makes me so mad. They just completely went back on their ethics. And
there's a lot of heterogeneity among libertarians in terms of just ideologically. And I spoke at this. A group, the Students for Liberty. I got criticized for it a lot, but I think it was a great group. It's good to engage. I don't agree with everything they say, but it's good to engage with them and have these conversations. I mean, that's I think one of the few good things about the Trump era is that people are having these conversations. They're getting more involved. So I think, and all these labels like libertarian, liberal, conservative, a lot of the dirt's coming out, and it's kind of hitting each other. So in a way, more dialogue is good.
With Ron Paul, when he was running as president, when he was a candidate, I felt like he had the answers. He had he wanted peace. He was the only politician that was suggesting a way for peace, while as every other candidate wanted war.
Yeah, he was non-interventionist, right? Overseas. I
know people see that as a bad thing, but he was like, do trade, not war, and I think the world would be more peaceful.
I'm not going to get started on that because that's going to be another 2-hour podcast episode.
That's stuff I'm going to. Yeah, no, it'd be great. I mean, if you have anything else to bring, we'd love to have you back on. It's always good to talk to you. And thank you for coming on. And I wish you the best of luck. Wish your kids and everybody and all the work you're doing.
This is an amazing story. I can't believe you're not famous yet, because you're going to be. This is more people should hear your story. So if anybody listening is a podcaster, or if you want to invite a speaker to your event, I think you're a great option. So reach out to her. And also people like look out for a book when it comes out. I think it's I'm gonna yeah, I'm gonna buy it. I want to know more of the details of your story, because this is was fascinating.
I also want to credit something else, like the information that I got from this, apart from reading other articles. A lot of it came from Graham Wood, who's a great guy, is a writer at The Atlantic, a fantastic writer, really good into I feel like he's one of the few voices in America who really understands what ISIS is about and how it works in that mindset. So he has a book called The Way of the Strangers, and I know, Tanya, you're featured in a lot of his writing as well, when he has talked about it. So
what I like about Graham Wood is that he's a detective journalist. Like, he really digs and looks for, as other journalists, I feel they just look at the surface and they just want to make up the rest. I was really impressed with his research and how much time he had put into finding out these things.
Yeah, I
couldn't believe it when I read it. I was like, how do I feel so invaded? My personal space is invaded.
So I want to actually stress this. I mean, this is like the Tanya who's been as close to this organization as anybody we know, or the people in it, and you're bringing good insight into the mindset that drives them, right? Like in his writing.
Mm-hmm. And his first article, What ISIS Really Wants, that was just that was actually creepy good. I was looking at that, I was like, this is it was really excellent. The first journalist that actually cared enough to do the research, and
and he's objective in an objective way, rather than trying to sell one side or whatever.
Yeah, and he's not. I think one of the things that I like about him is that he doesn't dismiss everything as okay. That's the other. He's not afraid to sound like he's humanizing people in order to understand them, and
that's the only way.
It's also very. Yeah, it's also very clear that he doesn't agree with them. He thinks that everything they do is as horrific as all of us think what they're doing is. Yeah. But in order to understand them, just humanizing and looking at the human element, he doesn't shy away from that. And I think that that's actually
a lot of people
courageous thing to do.
A lot of people don't seem to understand how you can condemn something as a barbaric and evil, but also try to understand the human source of how does somebody get to become that evil behind it. And when you go and try to look for these causes, a lot of people think like you should just point at it and call it evil. That's all you do. Like, well, no, if we don't go and look at the human elements behind it, you're never going to be able to find an effective way to address it.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up. Tanya, thank you again.
Unless you have anything else to add, Tanya?
Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, there's so much I could add, but I was just going to go into about slavery and how ISIS was not the first people to implement slavery. Slavery's been going on. You've lived in Saudi Arabia. There were servants. Place. Africa and Nigeria has a huge Congo, all of that. They've got slavery. You got Libya. They're doing it. No one's going to war with them. It's just like there's a lot of contradictions going on there. And I honestly believe that ISIS would have just turned into another kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Yeah. Because most of the foreign fighters were from Saudi Arabia, and they were taking Saudi Arabia material.
Saudi Arabia does everything they do.
Everything, the beheading, they do all that stuff. The amputation, Iran hangs gay people from cranes. I mean,
the only difference, but the only difference is that these are now officially recognized states and ISIS isn't. But they are basically committing more in number-wise. They're committing more crimes than ISIS.
And they're oil.
They're state terrorists.
And they have
it's okay to be a state terrorist. It's not okay to be
as long as you have a UN seat. Then you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this is again. Obviously the big problem with it's not just the slavery with ISIS. The problem is with ISIS is everything together. It's the ideology. It's the slavery. It's the attitude towards gays. It's the attitude towards women. There's all of that. And you're absolutely right. That is.
Like Graham Wood, for example, was arguing with me, and he was saying they're expansionists. They want to expand. And I said, well, the UN don't agree, but I'm okay. Personally, I'm fine with Israel expanding. that's going to make me hated. But I'm like, Israel's a nice place. You know, like if they were to expand, as long as they give, citizenship to the Palestinians and treat them as equals, it can work out, you know. But
but they're not going to give them citizenship.
Yeah, I know.
That's not.
But anyway, everyone's going to hate me to say no.
But Tanya, would Ron Paul agree with you though on that? I don't know if Ron Paul would agree. I was going to say, would Ron Paul agree with you on that?
I think Ron Paul would say, I think he'd say, let them do what they want. America has to look after Americans. And I agree.
I know that's it.
We have ghettos here that they're like terrorist states. We don't want to go there. We're scared to go to these places.
I'm going to side with Graham on the, but,
fair enough. I agree.
I know where you're coming from.
No. Graham, you guys are the academics. I trust you guys. I'm just.
I think a lot of people, when become ideological, they just think there's one answer to everything. I think every case has to be studied as if it's own separate case, right? I don't think, like, I consider myself a libertarian, but I still think like every policy you can't be like, okay, I'm a socialist, therefore I agree with this. I'm a capitalist, therefore I agree with this. I think every single case has to be studied separately, look at the evidence, analyze, and forget your ideology. Just figure out what works best at this specific situation at this specific time. That's what I think would be the best. Yeah.
And always a humanist approach.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyways, so we could keep going forever, but so
we could.
So we'll do this.
I've enjoyed this. Thank you. And then we'll have on your show.
Thank you, guys. This was great, and check the description for the links. Bye, guys.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you next time.
The Secular Jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadist.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the Flying Spaghetti Monster be with you.